Rochester Open, game number 2 recap. This move was my longest game of the event and the longest game that honestly I can remember for an over the board game. It was 85 moves. On the back side of the score sheet, this is just insane. It was the last game to finish in the whole tournament hall with over 100 players. So this game I had the white pieces against Eric Bell. He's an expert who I've known for a long time. He's a big supporter of Rochester chess. Let's jump right into it. So I have the white pieces, and I'm going for my typical Catalan setup that I like to play. Pawn to e6, pawn to g3. During these recaps, I should mention we have 35% off all of the ChessGoals courses, including the Catalan course. You can get free previews of the courses at courses.chessgoals.com. So check that out. Link in the description. The coupon code is OPEN, OPEN, for 35% off. So I'm playing g3 here, trying to transpose this into a Catalan. And after d5, bishop to g2, this is definitely heading towards Catalan territory. And now we see bishop to b4 check. So sometimes this can be a Catalan, but this can also be sort of like a Bogo Indian. It can transpose. And in our course, I recommend blocking with the knight. In the past, I've blocked with the bishop on d2 quite a bit, allowing this bishop trade. But I kind of like the knight block because it makes things a little bit more complicated, I think, for black. Black really doesn't want to trade bishop for knight in a lot of cases because then it gives white the bishop pair advantage. White will get two bishops against one. So Eric castles, knight f3, knight c6. This is kind of a typical Bogo Indian type move. The idea with knight to c6 is black wants to play e5 soon and trade off these two center pawns for these two center pawns, and then just kind of neutralize any advantage that white may have in the center. The downside of knight to c6 is the knight actually blocks this pawn on c7. In some cases, this can be a strategic liability for black, so that's kind of what I wanted to play for here. If you can envision a rook coming to c1 later, coming down the c file, maybe my bishop on f4, pointing at c7, you can kind of start to get a picture for how white could develop in this position to put pressure on that c7 pawn. So I castle, rook e8, and now pawn to c5. This is a sneaky move. What I'm trying to do here is I'm actually trying to play knight to b3, pawn to a3, and trap this bishop. Sometimes you can even play like knight to b1 in this position and then a3, b4. So the idea is, could I trap this bishop? And Eric wants none of that, and he plays the strongest move. Bishop takes d2. So what I like about this position is I did secure the bishop pair. What I didn't like about the position though is in the process I closed up the center. So when you have the two bishops against a bishop and knight, typically you want the center to be opened up. So now I need to start to look for ways that I can open up the bishops. Knight to e4 played, trying to eliminate one of my bishops. I bring him out to f4, pointing at this pawn, and I would kind of like to play b4, b5, maybe expand queenside. Eric plays b6, and I don't think this was the right strategic idea just because, as we talked about, I would like the position to be opened up a bit. Stockfish is saying the strongest move here is actually knight to e5, immediately targeting this knight. And I like that a lot because what this does, if these knights swap off, it opens up my light square bishop on this long diagonal, and now you can start to see my bishops coming to life. Instead, I took on b6 right away, so I kind of missed that opportunity to trade these knights. Eric took with the c pawn, and I played rook to c1, bringing some pressure down the open file. So I was pretty happy with my position at this point. Knight to a5, kind of targeting this c4 square. And I missed a critical move here. To really push for an advantage, I should play pawn to b4, kicking this knight. And the reason I didn't play it is I thought, well, knight to c4 just looks like exactly what black wants. He could play b5, really secure that knight on the outpost square. How do I take advantage of that? But there's a tactical resource, knight to e5, hitting the knight. And if black plays pawn to b5, excuse me, there's bishop takes e4, and after pawn takes, knight takes c4, winning the pawn. So had I seen that, knight to e5 is a really nice resource, taking advantage of both knights being defended by this pawn on d5. So it's actually the pawn on d5 is kind of overworked. And at this point, Eric would need to retreat that knight. So now this pawn actually just helps me out because I can get that queenside pawn expansion going. I already have the rook on the open file, and just everything looks nice here for white. But I missed this idea. I played queen to d3, and what you're going to see in this game, and this is a takeaway for me, is I really had trouble finding a good plan for white. I'm kind of just slowly maneuvering, thinking, well, maybe I'll double the rooks on the c file. Maybe I'll still get some queenside expansion going, but I really didn't want to allow knight to c4. Bishop to b7, pawn to b3. I'm just trying to play solid, not allow that knight in. Rook c8, and here I swap rooks and play the other rook to c1. And the reason I swapped rooks is because if queen takes on c8, my bishop guards c1, so I can still swing this rook over and keep control of the file. So that was something I was focused on. Can I keep control of the open file? And I'm okay with the rooks and queen trading off the board as long as I can get these two bishops active later. On to g5. Now, this is an interesting decision by Eric. I kept looking at g5 in this position, and my gut instincts told me that g5 is a positional mistake for black. Sometimes these breaks can work, right? g5, f5, kick a bishop out here on the king side. But in this position, knowing that I had the bishop pair, I still have a queen on the board, my feeling was that g5 was too weakening for black. And Stockfish confirmed this, but I wasn't able to actually figure out how do I take advantage of it. So bishop to e3 played. This was a good move. What I'm doing is I'm just backing up and I'm double attacking this pawn. Currently it has two defenders, but as we're going to see coming up, I can take advantage of that weakness. Pawn to f6 by black. Now, I missed the strongest move here, pawn to h4, and I'm really not sure why I didn't play it. I briefly considered it. I think in my mind, I felt that just h6 was solid enough. But Stockfish is saying h takes g, and now there's even knight takes g5 here. This is just a crazy looking tactic. If f takes back, pawn to f3. This knight has to move. Let's say knight to d6 looks natural. And now queen comes to g6 check. Bishop takes g5. And this is almost game over. There's really no good squares for this queen. Bishop to h6 check. The king tries to run. There's actually a mating net. What a crazy attack. And I didn't even have to sacrifice the knight. In this position, knight to d2 is also a super strong move. It's just eyeing queen to g6. So that's what I didn't calculate. I didn't understand that h6 is a bad move for black after h4. And if I would have known h6 is a bad move here, I definitely would have gone h4. I just felt that h4, h6 didn't gain anything for me. So I played knight to d2 in the game. Not a terrible move. And now at this point, again, I should play h4. And this is just a lack of understanding of this position. Pawn to h4. I mean, now there's no excuse. Pawn h6, this queen's coming in. If he takes, g takes h. I can play g takes h back. This king is going to be more vulnerable than my king because I have the bishop pair. My rook's coming to g1. And this knight on a5 is all the way across the board. This bishop on c8 all the way across the board. They're not in the attack currently. So this would have been another good way for me to play it. Pawn to h4. Okay, so then I kind of go with this slow play plan again. Bishop to h3, just poking at the center. Rook e7. Eric's looking at bringing it to the open file. You might be thinking bring him over to the king side too, just in case there's queen g6 ideas. Queen c2. Again, more aggressive would have been better. Pawn to f4. And I even talked about this. Like, I need to open up the position. I need to trade off some of the pawns. For some reason, I was just afraid to do it. I was trying to play too solid, I think. So now bishop to a6. And looking at the Stockfish eval, Stockfish still likes white. It says white's up like 0.8. Both Eric and I during the game felt that he kind of was controlling the position. Like, he was slowly improving. He was creating threats. I was reacting to them. Stockfish doesn't quite confirm that. It seems to think like, oh, white was actually fine most of the way or a little bit better. Uh, but as we'll see, I'm kind of just wasting time. And Eric seems to be improving his position. Okay, so now I play knight back to e1. My idea was, let's play knight to d3. Maybe bring him over here to the king side. Queen h5 played. This scared me for a second because I did not see it coming. I didn't even consider this move, and there's a fork. But fortunately, I had bishop to f1, so I kind of lucked out there. Knight to f5. Super annoying. Forking the bishop and pawn. I play queen to d2, and now Eric has the option to trade off the bishop pair. But the thing that I always have in my back pocket is the control of the c file. This was huge because knight takes e3. You really don't want to play that as black. This is knight's a strong attacker, and a lot of black's play right now comes from a kingside attack. So now I play knight to g2, kind of another strange move by me. Stockfish prefers pawn to g4, which kind of encourages black to make this trade or retreat. And if black retreats, I could play something like h4, f4, and finally start to open up the pawns. So knight g2, passive again by me, rook c7. Now I find g4 and f3. So at this point, I'm actually starting to like my position. What I'm thinking here is if the rooks and the queens come off the board, all I need to do is make sure that my king can get centralized and that I'm not going to lose these pawns, right? I see the knights and the bishop for black kind of lingering over on the queen side. As long as I don't lose a pawn on the queen side, I like the long-term advantage of the bishop pair. So I was okay with this position, even though it's kind of funky looking with this pawn chain. Knight b5. Now all of a sudden I start to feel like my position's a little bit better because I see if this e-pawn moves, I have this nasty pin on the knight. So I drop this bishop back. This pawn's ready to move, creating this pin. And now the game is definitely an advantage for white. Queen a3, rook c2, knight goes back. And here I take. This was a little bit hasty. We're at move 30. And looking at the clock situation, it was wrong game. Sorry. Move 30, it was 10 minutes for each player. So we have 10 minutes each with a 30-second increment. And that's kind of the theme of this tournament. Every game got down to this moment where it was 10 minutes or less per player, just living off the 30-second increment while still notating all the moves. And it really created a lot of like tense situations where players were making mistakes. So what I need to do here is calculate out that I don't have to capture this knight and play a move like pawn to h4. Kind of the same theme comes back again and again. This knight is also sort of pinned. Like the position is very awkward for black. So I play bishop takes b5. And my thinking was long term, I'm still controlling this c file. Even though I don't have the bishop pair, I felt that this was an advantage in the endgame. Now I offer the queen trade, and this actually loses all of my advantage. So the position is like 0.3 for white here. Okay, we're at move 35. I'm going to start to go a little bit faster. What I'm trying to do now is create this scenario where it's all about the c file. So see, I just traded off these knights. This knight got trapped. It was forced to trade. And I create this scenario where hopefully the c file control is enough to play for the win. And what I calculated was if rook to d6, trying to trade rooks, I could actually play bishop to g3. And if here, takes, bishop c7, this is probably still a draw. Opposite color bishop's only up one pawn, but it's a little bit scary for black to give up a pawn like that when you don't have to. But that was kind of my thinking. You know, if black wants to contest the c file, I could gain a pawn. So he plays a4, and I play rook c8 check, takes, bishop to b4. What I like about this position is I have full control. There's no way this rook can get down here and attack my pawns. There's no way this bishop can do any damage because I always have king to f2. So I'm kind of looking at ideas of swinging my rook across, and I know I can bring the king up, start pushing these pawns, and my opponent has to just sit and wait, which is really hard to do. Rook b7. So we're at move 41. This goes another 44 moves. I'm going to go kind of fast. King f2, h3. So here I go. I'm marching these pawns up on the king side. Pawn h4, and I'm keeping control of the c file, not allowing the black rook on the c file. A little bit of a repetition here. Computer's still saying equal. You know, each time you make a move, you gain 30 seconds. So repeating a couple times can gain a little time on the clock. Now I'm taking f takes g. I had calculated here that h takes g is probably the strongest move, and the computer agrees. The reason why is if I play h5, the black king can kind of just sit back here and wait. The issue with f takes g is I'm actually getting the bishop here check, controlling this diagonal, and this h-pawn comes up, creating a weak pawn on h6. This all of a sudden gives me enough to play for the win. Bishop check, king here, pawn to h5. So now I'm feeling very confident. There's one small issue though. Bishop to e8 was played, strongest move on the board, and now I have to figure out how do I crack this position. I know I'm better. I don't quite know if it's winning with best play, but I know I shouldn't lose this position. How can I get this rook over to the king side? If I get the rook over here, threatening this h-pawn, that's going to be game over. But right now there's this bishop on e8 blocking. It took me a while to find the correct plan, but the correct plan is actually going to be march this king all the way over to the queen side. And actually the computer likes keeping the king on dark squares so that that bishop can never execute a check. Okay, so I shuffle quite a bit. Now I finally see this idea. Let's march the king over. Here he comes over to the queen side, king all the way up to b4. And here I'm struggling a little bit for a plan. Okay, so what I'm trying to do right here, I'm now going for this rook trade. Rook here, swap rooks, bishop takes. And then what I can do is create this threat, bring the bishop back, kind of always trying to come here while my king marches in to attack this bishop. And I'm going to put the black king in Zugzwang. And I think the plan works, except there's one small issue, and that's black can play pawn to e5, sacrificing the pawn to open up this bishop for an attack on g4 because my king is not over there to guard it. So what I should have played here, let's see, where is the moment? Yeah, what I should have played is bishop to g7. I need to go back a couple moves. Right here. If king takes, rook takes. If the king tries to guard this pawn, rook g8, king goes here, rook h8, followed by rook d8. This is going to be a winning endgame because my king can come in and attack the rook. It's still complicated though, but the computer is saying +6 advantage. Okay, so I go for this rook trade, and it's actually a draw with best play. But my opponent has to play e5 here. It's the only move. You have to play e5, bring the bishop here. He misses it, and I position my bishop onto e5. And now the issue is this king is in Zugzwang, like we talked about. It has to guard this pawn. This bishop doesn't have any open squares. So here my opponent throws a pawn at me, tries to get active, but there's nothing he can do. My king is now cutting off the black king. You see this bishop coming through here. All I need to do now is march the pawn up, and my opponent resigned. So this was a pretty crazy game. I definitely missed some key ideas. I should be looking to play h4. I should look to trade pawns. Yeah, I just played too complacent, just kept everything back. I don't think I was ever really worse in that game, but it did feel like the position was slipping multiple times, which is true with the engine confirming it. I needed to play more accurately, try to trade some of those pawns off. Then the end game, I need to look at this a little bit deeper. This is super complicated, trying to figure out how to win this position. Um, Bishop to g7, though, seems to be the best move. But it's kind of a crazy position. Like you look at the engine lines and it kind of keeps repeating things. I should almost do a video just on this endgame study, but let me know what you guys think of this endgame. This is move 70 right here. I'm about to make my 71st move. What do you think the way is to crack this position? What sort of setup should white go for? How do you win this? And then please check out the courses. We got the 35% off sale during these recaps. Link in the description, coupon code OPEN, OPEN, at courses.chessgoals.com. And I will see you guys for the round 3 recap tomorrow. Thanks for watching.